So I would just like to welcome everyone along here today to join us at Action for ME. We're very pleased to be hosting this employment and self-advocacy webinar. And today I'm joined by colleagues Nikki Hughes, who is an advocacy officer at Action for ME, and our volunteers, our co-facilitators, Lizanne and Ellen, and Hannah, who is a volunteer evaluator. They're all here with us today. So if there's anything that you want to ask a question or raise an issue, either put something in the Q&A or the chat, and one of us will pick up on it and try and get it answered. If not, there will be a half hour at the end, which isn't going to be recorded, where people can ask questions. And we are aiming to have a 10-minute break halfway through if people feel it's needed. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Nikki, who is going to host the webinar for us today. And I really look forward to hearing more from you throughout the session and at the end. Thank you very much for coming along today. Here you are, Nikki.
Thank you very much, Avril. I'm just going to share some slides with you, and most of what I'm saying is on the slides. So in future, if you want to look at the slides again to get the information, it's all there. Avril, it says I'm disabled.
I've changed it now. Hopefully you should be able to share now.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Can everyone see my screen? Oh, this is good news. Okay, so I'm Nikki, as Avril says, one of the advocacy officers. And this is our presentation about ME in work. And hopefully it will give you some information about what you need to know about employment and where to go for more information. So today we're going to be looking at these main areas, thinking about going back to work, how to get back into work. You might be thinking about leaving work, including ill health retirement. And we're also going to look at occupational health and access to work because they have quite a big role to play in this process. So just a little bit about an hour long, including a 10-minute break midway, and there's a short poll at the end. There's, as Avril said, an optional 30-minute question and answer session after the presentation, and that bit won't be recorded, but this bit will be. So if we're thinking about returning to work, so I just need to change my screen because I can't see it all, sorry. Okay, if we're thinking about returning to work, this could be because you're returning being off sick. So if you've been off sick for quite a long time, which sometimes can happen, you need to consider if you feel able to return to the same role. And if you don't feel able to return to the same role, because it might be a role that's really long hours, or it might be quite physical and you don't feel that would work for you, consider what role might be appropriate. And you can discuss this with occupational health and with your manager. I'm definitely going back to work in my old job, and this is when I'm going to return. You need to inform your line manager, normally in writing, when you're going to be returning. And before you do that, it's a really good idea to decide if you want to permanently reduce your hours prior to returning. Sometimes people find that reducing their hours means that they're able to manage to be in work more and not be off sick because it's less of a burden for them to manage. If you want to do that in advance of returning, you need to complete a flexible working request. Now, some employers will turn those around really quickly, but in your flexible working policy, it will tell you the time. Some of them are up to 3 months, so it can be quite a long time. Once you decided you want to go back and you've notified them, arrange to visit your workplace. If you've been off for quite a while, it can be quite daunting going back, and there could be new people you've met. So arrange to visit, meet with your manager to plan your return, and it'd just be really nice to say hi to your colleagues and meet any new ones there might be. If you feel up to it, it's quite a good idea to go on team meeting day and attend the meeting, because then it makes you feel a bit more part of the team and it gets you up to date with what's happening. So we have a booklet called ME in Work, and that's available on our website. Really, really good resource, and it's referenced a lot throughout this presentation. So returning to work after a long-term absence needs to be carefully managed. You can't just think, oh, I've been off for 6 months, I'm feeling well enough to give it another go, it'll all be fine. It actually takes more of a process than that to try and give it the best chance of being successful. And your employer should be supporting you during this process. They might not have people returning to work from long-term absence. So you might need to take some of the things we're telling you here that they should be doing and perhaps suggest to them, or could we do this? Or do you think this is a good idea? So before you come back to work after a medium to long time off, it's very normal to have an occupational health assessment before returning to work. So I don't want you to be worried, thinking that's a tool they could use for more sinister means. It's actually a really supportive thing for both you and for your employer. And this assessment should be done quite near to the date of returning to work, because obviously conditions change and things happen. So if I had someone on long-term sick, 2 to 3 weeks before return is a good date. That gives them a chance to write the report, send it to the employer, and then you've got time to have a meeting and discuss what recommendations it makes before you go back. If it isn't offered to have an occupational employer for one, there are some employers that don't have an occupational health referral, but there's lots of independent services and they can use an independent one even as a one-off. But if they don't want to do that, they might have a company doctor, and a company doctor can also suggest reasonable adjustments. So once you've hopefully seen occupational health and you've got some recommendations, you can talk to your manager plan together that incorporates what the advice is in the report. So, and those things will be reasonable adjustments before you return. And these adjustments could be a temporary adjustment, or they could be permanent adjustments. And they should always be reviewed on a regular basis, because just because they might work week 1 of returning, it doesn't mean you still need them in week 4 or 6, or you might need more. So that it's something that it's a continual dialogue. If you see a company doctor or the occupational therapist, they will advise a phased returning to work pattern. They often last 3 to 4 weeks. So for example, if you worked 5 days a week, say 6 hours a day, week 1 might be 3 hours a day, and week 2 might be 3 hours plus lunch break. Week 3 could be 3/4 of your day, and then week 4 might be full-time adjustments. And what's important to realise, most employers, the time you work will be paid at your normal wages. The time you're not working on a phased return, that could be paid as sick pay. I've just put a little reminder in about the Equality Act, because there's lots of responsibilities for the employer. So the Equality Act 2010 is the main anti-discrimination covers all of our protected characteristics. Disability is one of those characteristics, and it defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal daily activities. So many people who have a diagnosis of ME are likely to meet this definition. Employers and service providers have a duty because we need people with disabilities to be allowed equal access. Reasonable isn't defined in the Act, and it does depend on the size of your employer and your business need. For example, a really big employer that has 1,000 people might find it really easy to make all sorts of adjustments, find you different roles, somewhere different to sit, a space near the door, a car park space, all sorts of things like that. But if you work for a company that has 2 other people in it, or they might not have as much money to make so many adjustments, it does depend. Reasonable works for both the employer and the employee. So a reasonable adjustment is a change that must be made to remove or reduce a disadvantage related to an employee's disability when they're doing their job. And that sentence comes from ACAS, which is the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service. Their website has huge amounts of really brilliant information. So what do reasonable adjustments look like for people with ME? Common reasonable adjustments that we see are things like allowing rest breaks to be spaced throughout the day. So it's quite typical in a job to have a 1 hour lunch break, but it might be better to have 2 half-an-hour breaks or 3 20-minute breaks for that person. You might need your desk moved away from windows or bright lights. You might need noise cancelling headphones because you're noise sensitive. You might need flexible working, such as being able to start later. You might start at 8 o'clock normally, but it takes you a while to get going and finish your personal care tasks and get to work in the morning now. So you might not start till 9 or 10 o'clock. And you might have flexible working patterns. If you're really lucky, some employers will take your hours and as long as you work today, they'll let you choose what works for you. It does depend very much on your industry. They might be able to provide a parking space close to the entrance, so your walking is limited. And they also might have a side room available for the employee to rest. I knew someone once in one of my organisations that had his own office, and he had a little sign, and the sign said, if the blinds are down, don't knock on the door. So when he needed a rest, he put his blinds down, and then he'd bring them up again when he felt ready to engage and be able to chat to people again. And the other adjustment, they might do reduced hours for you. So if you're not returning to your current position because you've been off sick, you might think you're ready for work now and you might be looking for a new position. So you need to consider if you want to be home-based. This makes quite a big difference. There are now lots and lots of home-based roles. And if you search on the job search engines, you might find them under home-based or remote working. And there's a lot of them if you go and search for them. And that's one of the good things that COVID did for us. If you decide you're going to work at the company location, set yourself a goal. Will the commute be manageable? Decide how far away from home you think is acceptable for you and that journey might be, because traveling is going to wear you out to some degree or other. So just give yourself the best chance before you even get to work. Don't make that too long. And think about how many hours you realistically feel you could commit to. You might think, oh, I could do 30 hours, but perhaps I'll start with 20 or 25 hours and then see how I go. Lots of companies, if it's a bigger company, there's only to date. And think about what type of role you'd enjoy and what type of job would fit with your energy levels, because you're going to have to pace yourself when at work. And maybe a really active, fun job might not work so well unless it was fewer hours. So you need to search for roles that fit your criteria that you've thought about, the things we've just discussed, and apply for that job. And I think you've got a disability, you need to consider whether you're going to disclose it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Legally, you don't have to disclose it, but there are some advantages to doing so. And another thing you can think about is, could you become self-employed and work from home? That way you could work to a schedule that suits you and times that suit you more. But other than just doing the work you're going to be doing for other, you have to do your own tax returns. You might have to find your work for your clients, depending on what you're doing. So there could be some added stresses to that. But equally, you've got that flexibility. And a good tip, if you're going to disclose the disability, consider the third sector, the charity sector. These organisations are often really disability friendly, very nice organisations, well used to supporting people and really accommodating. So the other scenario is that you're in a role currently and you just feel you can't continue in it anymore. You're too unwell and you're not managing to do your job, or you're off sick a lot. And you might feel you can't continue. There's no other more suitable role available in the company you could move to. So then you have some options or actions to consider. If you are in a pension scheme, you could consider ill health retirement while paying into that pension scheme. But for ill health retirement, you will need enough medical evidence to say that you're either permanently not well enough to work or that you're not well enough to work, certainly for now and for the next couple of years, few years. If you're going to leave your role, it's quite important, if you can, that you give the correct notice and explain to your employer why you're leaving. Down the line, let's hope that things really improve for you and you're much better, and you might then want to look for work again. It would be nice if you can go back to your last employer for reference. Lots of new employers do insist on having your last employer. So it's good to leave on good terms, or maybe you can even go back to them. As we talked about before, if you're leaving work, you could still consider a role working from home, even if it was just if you felt able to. So for example, if you were a teacher, you might do some virtual tutoring for a limited amount of hours a week. Or if someone worked in finance, they might do a few hours bookkeeping for a small local firm. Before resigning, contact a benefits advice specialist if that's applicable to your circumstances. Now, we'd recommend Citizens Advice because they're going to understand what you might apply for those benefits. It's important to go to a benefit specialist because things change all the time in the benefit world and they're always up to date with their information. And if you're unfortunate enough to be undergoing a formal capability procedure at work related to your absence level, and you feel you're at the point where you're going to be dismissed, it might be a good idea to get some advice. So maybe legal advice from a law centre to help you decide whether resigning is better than dismissal in your circumstance. It isn't for everyone, but only an expert would be able to advise you on that. So we talked earlier that you could possibly ask for ill health retirement. So this is on page 40 of our booklet. An application for ill health retirement must be made by the individual. It can't be made by the company. You might be pressured by your employer to request this option without really understanding what it entails. So it's important you understand if you are not awarded ill health retirement, it can affect your continuing employment. And I'll explain a bit more about that later on. So to qualify for ill health retirement, you must be an active pension scheme member and provide medical evidence that your condition is putting you in your current role, or that you're so poor you can't really work in any role. Evidence will be needed from several sources, including an occupational health professional, your own doctor, other specialists, and maybe even the scheme might refer you to a doctor to get an independent opinion. Once the process for ill health retirement has started, it can't be reversed. It requires you to state that you can't continue working in your... Now, that means if ill health retirement isn't granted, this can lead to employment being ended on grounds of capability. But if you are granted ill health retirement, it's wonderful because it means you don't have to worry about trying to struggle to get into work. You're not worried about having time off sick, and financially you know that you can manage. So it is a wonderful thing if it's right for you. Retirement is normally made by the employer and sometimes by the workplace pension provider. So in local authorities, it's made by the pension provider, and sometimes people from the employer will be sat on a panel with them. Panels are used in most of the pension providers to make it a fairer process. And there are different tiers of ill health retirement available, but each scheme has is a different policy and has some of them are permanent, quite high level tiers, so you get quite a good amount of money and it's forever because no one expects you to be able to return to work. Some of them could be a temporary award for a few years because you might be expected to be better at that point. And some of them are at permanent but lower level. You may only receive a pension based on your contributions. So if you've only been there a couple of years, that wouldn't be a very big pension. But if you've been there for 30 years, it depends on your pension provider and the scheme. And it's always a good idea to talk to your provider beforehand. They've got lots of knowledgeable people there, and there's always a helpline and an email address normally. And also you can talk to the Pensions Advisory Service, which is also in the list of references later on, before you make your decision. So we're about halfway through from most of the information. So we'll say 10 minutes because we're whizzing through quite quickly. So if we see everyone back here at 4:32, that would, 2:32, that would be great. That's all right with everyone.
So I'm just checking in with people and seeing if anyone here has anything that they'd want to raise just now, or a comment they want to make before we start into the presentation again, because we've got a bit of space. So please don't hesitate if there's anything that you want to bring up just at the moment. Either raise your hand, put it in the chat, or put something in the Q&A. And all of these options are along the bottom. If you put your cursor over the bottom bit of the screen, then you can see these options here. But if everybody's happy, then we can let Nikki go ahead with the rest of the presentation, and we do have time at the end for any questions that people have. Thank you.
So can everyone see my screen okay? Okay, so thank you for coming back. So we're going to look now at action. We're going to look at what are the occupational health services, when a referral to occupational health is made, and what the service can do for you. So occupational health referrals are made at 2 times, really. The first one is prior to starting work in a new job. So once you've applied for your job and been for your interview and an offer of employment has been made, in fact, almost all will send you something called a pre-employment health questionnaire. It could be really short with just maybe 7 questions, and next to it might have yes and no tick boxes. And they're either expecting you to answer all yes, depending how they word their questions, or all no. And if it's a questionnaire that's designed for you to say no, if you say yes because you might have a condition or a disability, HR department with the rest of your paperwork, they know that because something's been declared, they need to give you either a long health questionnaire, which asks for more information, which you would normally send straight to the occupational health provider themselves, or they might pass your details to occupational health to give you a call or send you an email, but they'd notify you if they were going to do that. And what this does, it allows new employers to support their new by understanding whether they've got an illness, injury, or disability, and it helps them understand how they can support you and what help you might need in your role. And they want to have all the reasonable adjustments they need to make and the reporting from occupational health before you start work, so they can make sure you start in the best way possible. The other time people are referred to occupational health is while they're already in their role. And it can, circumstances happen. So you may have been off several times with the same illness, even if it's 2 or 3 days. If there's a pattern, lots of headaches or tummy aches, something, they might think, well, there might be something going on here. We can support you with an occupational health referral. Or you might go to your employer and say, actually, I've just been diagnosed with this condition, or with ME in this instance, I've got a diagnosis of ME now. Thought I better let you know. Or it could be someone that is struggling, and the employer might think there's a reason for that and have a chat and offer an occupational health referral. What I don't want anyone to think is that it's a negative thing or they need to be worried. It's not. It's a supportive step, and it supports the employee and the employer with either your return to work or going into your new role. So this is also in your work and ME booklet. What occupational health does is they consult with you and they provide the employer with medical information about your health. They tell them a bit about what the condition is, because employers aren't medical experts. They tell them normally if you're fit to work in your current role or in a new role. They give advice on suitability for alternative roles. So you could be a PE teacher, but really struggling with the physical element, for example, and they might be really well suited for. And they will also give an indication of whether it's viable for you to have ill health retirement. If they've had a chat to you, talked about your history and your illness, and they think this won't get through a panel, this person's not going to have it, they would advise against trying for an ill health retirement. And very importantly, any adjustments and actions that may support you in work, and even more importantly, to rise on all of those things as well. So the person you're going to see in occupational health, and nowadays, it's changed since COVID, a lot of these appointments are now virtual or on the phone. It could be a specialist nurse, an occupational therapist, or a doctor. And sometimes you might see or talk to more than one person. Occupational health should be a neutral party. They're not there just for your benefit, and they're not there just there for both of you to help the relationship and help the working arrangement work as well as it can. They give recommendations and information that benefits you both. And you do have a legal right to see the occupational health report before it's sent to your employer. So you can ask to approve it. And if there's something in there you don't like, you could ask for it to be removed or changed before it's sent to your employer. People do ask for prior sight sometimes, but it's not that common. So occupational health make recommendations the employer should follow, and they make recommendations the employees should follow. So recommendations and actions for the employer will be things like allowing a change of hours, allowing a phased return to work. An OH will detail what that phased return. They might recommend weekly one-to-ones with your line manager. So that's quite important to make sure that the changes you've got currently are the right changes that are working for you and working for the employer. Or you might have thought it might work, actually you need it adjusted slightly, or the employer hasn't had another idea and would like to adjust it another way. So it's really good to have these weekly one-to-ones, and it makes you feel supported and not forgotten about because you've now returned. They might recommend adjusting aspects of your role. For example, if you have to in your role carry loads, and carrying things is something that makes you tired or can give you pain or something, they might say, is it possible to have a trolley to push that load on, or for someone else to carry the loads instead, so there's no manual handling, for example. They might recommend changing roles, or they might suggest providing specialist equipment, rings, or desks that can move up and down for different heights, so you're not just sat in one position all the time. They might also recommend an access to work application. That's something we're going to talk about later, and that's something the employee needs to do for themselves. But access to work is a really useful service, and it can provide funding for equipment. It can provide training for your company to learn about your condition, because as I said earlier, and people need to learn about conditions so they can understand properly what's going on for that person. And they can provide workplace support for people with disabilities as well. So I said earlier that occupational health make recommendations for employers and employees, and there will be things for you to proactively do as well. So one of the recommendations might be to share information about your condition. It's really important people understand it's up to you how much you share. You might not want to give them every detail, but a high level summary might help with that. We do have leaflets here at Action for ME that might help with that. You might want to share that. It's not personal, but just about the condition. The occupational health provider might have given you resources for self-help. So it could be links for mindfulness or services, all sorts of things. And they will give you tips on how to be proactive with your care as well. Caring for yourself, that's important. And also they will ask you to flag worsening symptoms to your employer, because it might be you get referred back to occupational health, because ME is a fluctuating illness. You have periods where, you know, it's quite a little bit manageable, somewhere it gets quite a lot worse, or just a little bit worse. But if you're going through perhaps a relapse or a longer period where it's worsened, it might be worth going back to OH, because they might be able to make suggestions for further adjustments that can be made to support you. So I mentioned access to work, and access to work is a government scheme run by the Department for Work and Pensions. It can fund equipment, it can fund training for your company, to learn about your support for disabled people. So an example of equipment might be, you might need a specialist chair with all sorts of different supports that can be tweaked to work perfectly for you. Someone who's physically, visually impaired, there's a special sort of telescope thing that goes really close to the screen, that's on a stand, and they can be able to read the computer better. There's all sorts of things. It could be software, it could be dictation software, all sorts of things it might be. So you can apply for grants to help pay for practical support with your work. You can get advice about managing your mental health at work. You can get money to pay for communication support at job interviews. And quite a few people with access to work have support workers or job coaches to help you at work. For most people, that's not a full-time thing, but they might come in once or twice a week for specific sessions that are quite demanding, or someone finds challenging, and they might be able to help support with those activities, for example. So it's a really flexible service that can offer all sorts of things. And depending on the size of the employer, access to work can fund up to 80% of the cost for equipment for existing employees and 100% of cost for new employees. Obviously, if your employer is bigger, they will be asked to pay the first, I think currently it's £1,000. But you have to be quite a big employer to be able to do that. And they can also fund the cost for return taxi travel to work if you're unable to drive as a result of your disability, where there's no public transport available. So if you work somewhere, there is a bus stop, but it's 20 minutes walk away, that would be considered not suitable public transport for someone with ME, because that would be quite a tiring walk. If you do get this taxi service, cost. So we're going to look at how Action for ME might be able to help you if you're thinking about starting a new job, going back to your current job, or leaving your job even. So there's lots of different things we can do, and there's two ways mainly that we can help you. So the first is through our information and support line, which you can ring, and they can help you with issues, or providing you with lots of information, signposting you to specific places that would help with, you know, a very specific thing if it's something we couldn't do. Or they might be able to offer to put you in touch with their advocates. So some of the things that we would do either on the advice line or with the advocacy service, we can give you information and options about that you might be able to do within that situation. We don't advise, and we can't direct you, but sometimes we'll tell you what the likely outcomes might be of those options. So we've given you information to help you decide. We'll give you information about the Equality Act and explain how it may help you with your employer, because it might be that they've decided they're not going to look at the reasonable adjustments that Occupational Health have asked to be made. We might provide advocacy to assist you to prepare for your meetings, or during the meetings themselves, because it's important your voice is heard and your views and opinions are communicated clearly. We can produce something we call an impact statement to increase the understanding of your condition, how it affects you, and how your employer can work with you in the most effective way. So the impact statement would explain a bit about what your specific symptoms are and how that affects you. And we would often talk about best ways of working with you, or the things that will work that they could do that will help you in your role. There's lots of things we can do there. So after this slide, we are going to go through the 2 resource slides, so I can explain where you can find the things I've referenced, or you can go for further. Very much for coming today and listening to the webinar on ME in work, or if you're watching this recording at a later date, we hope it's been useful for you, and we're going to have questions and answers later as well. So there's 2 slides with useful resources on. And do you want to do the poll, and then I can talk about them maybe?
Yes. Sorry, I thought we'd ended there. So launch the poll. Just complete.
No, that's all right.
As needed. Hi, Claire. I'm just going to see if I can allow you to talk.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Claire. What's your question?
It's just like advice about self-employment.
Self-employment, yeah. Have you got a business idea that you're thinking of doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite different from what I did before. Previously, I worked in advertising, and this is to do reupholstery. So different. But
So have you been in touch with any organisations that support people into self-employment?
No, that was kind of my question, like, do they exist?
Yeah, so there's the Prince's Trust, which is for people who are under 25. And then there's another one I think that Nikki's got in the presentation, isn't there? And I think what I'll do is I'll end the poll now, because that looks like we've had most of the answers in, and I will share the results. So people found it useful, 73%, and 64% feel a bit more confident, because obviously that's a more difficult thing. And 100% feel that they'd be interested in attending again. So thank you very much for that. So Nikki, do you want to talk about the stuff that was in the references? And that might answer.
It might do a little bit. I'll just get the screen back. Hopefully you can all see that again, because I can't see your faces when this is on. So I was just going to talk through just quickly. There's a couple of pages of resources. The book is on there, that's on our website, and it's quite a long booklet with a lot of good information. There's also an ME and work fact sheet and an employer's guide to ME that might be useful for you to give to your employer. So there's sort of four things relevant there. And then I mentioned about ACAS. They provide information, advice, training, conciliation, which is like mediation for employers and employees, because sometimes you're not agreeing, you feel you're not listening to each other, you can't really reach a compromise or an agreement, and ACAS can step in, or another mediation service, and really help both parties through that. And then can be quite successful. You can come out the other side with everyone having a much better understanding, and then it can go quite well after that. So that's something good to consider. Citizens advice we talked about, which is independent, confidential. They can give you advice about all different topics. And we've got for the different nations, the different citizens advice areas. And then there's Citizens Advice and Equality and Human Rights Commission Act employment toolkits that they've done, and that can be found on that link. That's quite useful as well. And Disability Rights UK have got quite a good section all about careers and work for disabled people. And then on the last sheet, we've got Pensions Advisory Service, which if you are thinking about ill health retirement, it's really worth giving them a call, or at least looking on their website to talk about your own situation and see what they advise. Access to Work, There's a link so you can go to the Access to Work on the government website to find out all about it, and it tells you how to apply, and you can even apply from there. Fit, we mentioned, I think, on there, and there's another reasonable adjustments in practice. It's another Equality and Human Rights Commission, sort of like a leaflet and a section on their website, and that tells you all about how that really works and all the different kinds of reasonable adjustments there can be, and gives some good examples as well, some case studies. So there are some Scottish specific resources. So Fair Start Scotland is a flexible employment work and achieve your potential. And there's 3 resources there, and each of those 3, I've had a look at them, they're really good. And also Into Work is supporting people back into work for people in Edinburgh and Midlothian areas specifically. So there's some Scottish ones there. So that's the end of the resources now, but there is quite a lot there for you to go and find out some more about it.
So Claire, that's one resource there that you might be able to access, the Fair Start Scotland. And in each area, there's usually some sort of business support organisation like Business Gateway that might be able to offer you advice about how you start up. It might not be specifically tailored to that, but in different areas have different things. Like in Perth, there's one aimed at women business startups. So that's something that you could research. Does that answer your question?
Also, on the government website, there's a really good section about self-employment, because you're going to have to do your own tax returns. It tells you about how you can get a business loan from, it's a government-backed scheme, but it isn't